Good morning, ma'am, and fellow classmates. Now, let's move to our next topic, natural resources. What do you mean by natural resources? The biosphere provides us all the psychological necessities of all, such as oxygen, water, and various forms of energy. It also provides us essential services which are indispensable to humanity, such as recycling of nutrients, waste assimilation, generation of soil, pollination, and many other life-supporting processes. These essential services are made possible through different life forms that are performing specific roles in our environment. 90% of the energy we use now is provided by fossil fuels at the price of urban air pollution and global warming. Fuels are non-renewable resources that are now rapidly depleting. Ano nga ang renewable resources? Renewable resources is a substance that is used up more quickly than it can replace. Resources include coal, natural gas, oil, and nuclear energy. Once these resources are used up, they cannot be replaced, which nagiging major problem na sa atin as we are currently depending on them to supply most of our energy needs. Imagine, ano kayang mangyayari sa atin kapag nawala ang mga natural resources such as mawalan tayo ng pagkain, mawalan tayo ng water and fuels. Di ba wala? We cannot survive. That's how natural resources are very important in our life. Moving on, let's see what biodiversity is. Next slide, please. Biodiversity. Biodiversity is not just a collection of species, but also the various roles and connection established through time. These interconnections enable the survival of the whole ecosystem or community. The varieties of individual species and communities of species present in a given area, or it refers to the varieties of living organisms. As you take a look at the picture, there are plants, flowers, animals, and many more in the picture. That is an example of biodiversity. Moving on, there are biodiversity, the genetic diversity, the species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. But what does each of these levels really mean? Genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is about the diversity of genes existing in the living world between and within different species. There are different genes and different expressions of genes, and this genetic variability contributes to the multiplicity of life forms, physical and biological characteristics, and depending on the interaction environment. And species diversity. Species diversity, we speak of species diversity to describe the diversity of living species. There are millions of living species on Earth. They are all different and divided into groups depending on their specificities. There are insects, kinds of animals, plants, and fungi. And lastly, ecosystem diversity. This refers to the varieties of ecosystems, by their nature and number, where living species interact with their environment and with each other. For example, on Earth, there are different ecosystems, each with their specificities like deserts, oceans, lakes, plains, or forests. And even within these ecosystems, there are special details like coals or hot deserts, boreal or tropical forest, warm or cold water, coastal regions. Each ecosystem has its own peculiarities, species, and ways of functioning. And now, let's move to our next reporter. Next slide, please.
Good day, everyone. Now, let's move on to our next topic. We are going to talk about the biodiversity as part of the natural environment provides variety of functions. A while ago, we talked about biodiversity. And now, we are going to tackle about the four variety of functions that provides by biodiversity to natural environment. These are the regulation functions, carrier functions, production functions, and information function. If we talk about regulation functions, it refers to the maintenance of the delicate between ecological processes such as nutrient cycling and flow of energy. Ang regulasyong function, ito ay tumutukoy sa pagpapanatili ng maselan na balanse sa pagitan ng ecological na proseso, tulad ng nutrient cycling and flow of energy. Upang mapanatili natin ang balanse sa pagitan ng ecological na proseso, ang regulation function ay nagbigay ng mga patakaran. A. Regulation of the chemical compositions of the atmosphere. It is important to regulate compositions of the atmosphere because chemical compositions of the atmosphere allows life to thrive on Earth. B. Regulation of the chemical compositions of the ocean. It is also important to regulate chemical compositions of the ocean because ocean currently regulate global climate. C. Regulation of the local and global climate. D. Regulation of runoff and flood prevention. E. Prevention of soil erosion and sedimental control. F. Formation of topsoil and maintenance of soil fertility. G. Fixation of solar energy and biomass production. And the last one is regulation of biological control mechanism. Biodiversity provide this function because regulation function give us a policy to protect land, air, water, and soil. Now let's move on to the second variety of functions. This is carrier function. It refers to the provision of space and a suitable substrate for A. Human habitation, B. Energy conservation, and C. Recreation and tourism. Ang carrier function ay tumutukoy patungkol sa pagkakaloob ng espasyo at angkop para sa tirahan ng tao, pagtitipid ng enerhiya at libangan ng turismo. Now, let's move on to the third variety of function. This is production function. It refers to the products that can be derived from them, such as oxygen, clean water, food, genetic resources, medical resources, biochemicals, raw materials for clothing and household fabrics, raw materials for building construction and industrial use. Para naintindihan nating husto ang patungkol sa production function, ito ay tumutukoy sa mga produkto na maaring makuha mula sa oxygen, malinis na tubig, pagkain, genetic resources, biochemicals, mga materyales para sa damit at tela sa bahay, at higit sa lahat mga materyales para sa pagtatayo ng gusali. And now, let's talk about the last variety of function, the information function. Information function, it refers to the provision of unlimited opportunities for spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, and recreation. Ito naman ay tumutukoy patungkol sa probisyon ng walang limitasyong mga pagkakataon para sa espiritual papayaman at pagpapalawak na kaalaman patungkol sa A. Aesthetic information. When we talk about aesthetic information of environment, it refers to the interaction between people and environment na may kaugnayan din sa kagandahan. Letter B. Spiritual and religious information. Letter C. Historic information. It also talks about the history on how human deals to nature. Letter D. Cultural and artistic inspiration. Letter E. Scientific and education information. This is the process that allows individual to explore with environmental issues. This last function of biodiversity gives us knowledge and understanding about environment. That is all about the four variety of functions of biodiversity as part of natural environment. Next reporter.
We have fossil fuels as one of the natural resources. Fuels are those decomposing plants and other organisms which is buried beneath layers of sediments and rocks, which is taken 2 millennia to become these carbon deposits, which they have three types: the coal, mineral oil, and natural gas, which supplies the 80% of the world energy. The non-renewable fuels can be obtained through mining extractions inside the land or huge ocean. It is said that our whole human race is dependent on these fuels to carry out the task for their existence, and without them, it is difficult for our survival. That because it utilizes in nearly 96% of items that we use today, from the electricity to heat and the transportations that we use in every day, and the process of making vast products from steel to plastics, and also to run the machinery. And then, if we have this, we have also the environmental effects of these fuels, oil and natural gas. The following is the recovery. We're in the process of removing or extracting an energy source for use. The effects of this is the disruptions of the land, ang pagkasira ng mga lupain, pollutions of surface and groundwater from runoff, filtrations and leaks, accidental release of air and pollutants, land subsidence, and damage to fragile ecosystem. Wherein when the oil spilled, it's polluted and contaminated streams, rivers, which is toxic and harmful to plants, animals, and a threat to their habitats. These toxics are harmful to breathing. And the number 2, the refining, wherein when the machinery break down, the thousands of oil can seep and the effect of these oil spills, the environment and habitats can be catastrophic. They can kill plants and animals, and it can cause the air pollution and the water pollution. And effects for the animals, mostly the marine animals, they will get covered with oil. And also the feathers of birds absorbs the oil and they couldn't fly. and sadly can't make it and they will die. And also the death of coral reef that are the principal source of food for fish, and the effects of the seafood that is for human consume. And we move on to the next types of fossil fuels. We have the coal, which is the hard black minerals composed predominantly of carbon, formed from compressed, partially decomposed vegetation, and particularly those of the Carboniferous and Peruvian geological periods, wherein this coal it causes the health problems, but is also the main contributor to climate disruptions. And then there is the effects of this coal in the environment, the disruptions of the land, wherein the miners or people who want a coal for use, before they get the coal, they will first remove the trees from the top of the mountain. They literally blow the top of the mountains to get the coal. These animals will be disturbed and flew away in some places. And this mining, it will cause also the erosions, result in the destructions of the land. It can no longer be used for planting crops. And next, the mining has exposed rocks which contain the sulfur-bearing mineral pyrite. This mineral reacts to air and water to form sulfuric acid. When it rains, the diluted acid gets into rivers and streams and can even seep into underground sources of water. If this will happen, it contaminated the drinking water for us to drink. And then the mining waste can be toxic when they expose to air, water. Examples of these toxins are the mercury, arsenic, fluorine, and the amount of this dust generated in mining operations can be carried to nearby towns by the wind. These dust particles can cause all kinds of health problems for humans who are exposed to it. And this coal dust inhalation causes lung disease, kidney diseases, and others. And as the dependency of these fuels, human begins to use them recklessly without considering that these fuels are a renewable source of energy which does not develop in a day or two. It takes out millions of years to form. If we continue to use and burn these fuels at this rate, they can also have the potential to harm the environment, as I explained a while ago, and which they made up of harmful chemical bonds. They could be dangerous for us. And this will eventually contribute to greenhouse effects, which then contribute to climate change and cause global warming. And that's all for our report. Thank you for listening. We hope that you understand our lesson for today. Thank you again.